Okay, so picture this, a man who just appears in the middle of 18th century Europe. Nobody knows where he's from, no family, nothing. But somehow he's got kings listening to his every word. He's this brilliant musician, a serious chemist, a secret diplomat, and maybe, just maybe, something else entirely. We're going to dive deep into the story of the Comte de Saint-Germain. I mean, come on, you know you've made an impression when Voltaire, the sharpest, snarkiest mind in all of Europe, is writing about you like this. And he's saying this to Frederick the Great. He wasn't entirely joking either. This one line, right here, it just perfectly sums up the unbelievable reputation Saint-Germain created. It's the kind of thing that legends are made of, literally.
And seriously, what a legend it was. The whispers were just wild. People were convinced he'd found the secret to eternal life. He dropped these hints about a so-called universal medicine that could, cure anything. And his talents? Off the charts. He could play the violin so incredibly well it sounded like a whole orchestra was in the room. And then there was the stuff that seemed like magic tricks, but maybe weren't, like taking a flawed diamond and making it perfect, or even melting smaller diamonds into one giant one. The guy was an absolute master of mystique.
All right, so that's the legend, the larger-than-life story. But underneath all the supernatural claims and the high society gossip, there was a real person here, a man who left a very real, documented footprint all over Europe. So the big question is, if we strip away the myth, who was this guy really? What do the history books actually say? Let's follow the evidence.
So the first time he really pops up on the historical radar is in London, 1745. And what's he doing? Getting arrested as a suspected spy. But here's the thing. They can't prove a single thing, so they have to let him go. After that, he starts showing up in the most powerful circles you can imagine. We're talking about being a favorite at the French court with King Louis XV. He's sent on secret peace missions during a massive war. And he spends his final years as a guest of a German prince, working on alchemy. You've got to admit, that is not the resume of your average scam artist.
And he wasn't just talk. King Louis XV didn't just find him entertaining, he seriously invested in him. He gave Saint-Germain his own laboratory at the incredible Château de Chambord at 100,000 francs. That's a huge amount of money back then. And what was he working on? Not just magic potions. It was practical stuff, industrial chemistry. He was trying to create better dyes for fabrics, new formulas for cosmetics. This points to a serious man of science. But of course, not everyone was convinced, and one of his biggest skeptics was none other than Giacomo Casanova. Now here's a guy who knew a thing or two about creating a persona, right? Casanova met him, saw his whole act, the diamond tricks, the casual claims of being centuries old, and was totally unimpressed. He flat out called him the king of imposters. It's like they say, right? Game recognizes game. And all this brings us to the million-dollar question. If he wasn't some immortal wizard, then who was he, really? Where did this guy even come from? And how in the world did he get so much money, such a great education, and an all-access pass to the most exclusive rooms in Europe? Well, the most plausible explanation we have actually comes from Saint-Germain himself. Near the end of his life, he supposedly confided in his patron, Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel. He claimed he was the son of Prince Francis II Rákóczi of Transylvania. Now, if that's true, it explains everything. The access to money, the world-class education, why he was so comfortable around other royals, and of course, why he had to be so secretive. He'd be a prince without a throne, needing a new identity to survive. And to protect that identity, he wore a lot of masks. I mean, he used at least a dozen different names. He'd be Prince Rákóczi here, Chevalier Well Done over there. Each alias was like a new costume, making it practically impossible for anyone to figure out who he really was or where he came from. He was a true master of being a ghost. All right, but no matter who you are, every life eventually comes to an end. And for the man we know as the Comte de Saint-Germain, that end was officially recorded in 1784. Now that should be it, the final chapter. The credits roll. But this is Saint-Germain we're talking about. For him, death was just the beginning of his real legend. Okay, let's just look at the hard facts for a second. There is an official church register in a town in Germany. It is crystal clear. It records the death of, and I'm quoting here, the so-called Comte de Saint-Germain on February 27th, 1784. That's an official record. It's undeniable. The guy was dead. He was buried. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast, because almost immediately the stories started bubbling up again. The biggest ones come from the memoirs of a Countess d'Adhémar, who was a lady-in-waiting for Marie Antoinette.
In her book, she claims she met Saint Germain, looking exactly the same, not a day older, on multiple occasions after his supposed death. We're talking 1789, 1793, all the way into the 1820s. These sightings are the absolute foundation of the whole immortality myth.
And now for the major plot twist. Modern historians have looked into this, and guess what? The memoirs of the Countess d'Aude Hamar are a total forgery. They were written by a guy named Lamoth Langon, who is basically a professional liar. He cranked out fake historical memoirs for a living. So what does that mean? It means the primary evidence, the smoking gun for Saint Germain's immortality, is built on a complete and total fabrication. But you know what's wild? The truth didn't matter one bit. The idea of an immortal Saint Germain was just too powerful, too compelling to die. So even with those forgeries fueling the fire, his legend took a hard left turn. It left the world of history behind and jumped headfirst into the world of spirituality. And that's where things get really, really weird. I mean, you can actually trace the evolution. Step 1, he's a real historical figure in the 18th century. Step 2, fast forward to the late 1800s, and Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, basically drafts him onto her team of secret spiritual masters. Step 3, by the 1930s, a guy in California claims Saint Germain appeared to him on Mount Shasta as an ascended master, and this kicks off a whole new religion called the I Am movement. And finally, step 4, he becomes a full-blown New Age icon associated with something called the violet flame. He went from a man to a myth to a literal god for some people. It's like the legend is this living thing that just keeps mutating. It doesn't stop. In the 20th century, the basic story, this elegant, mysterious, ageless nobleman, popped up in a totally new place. It inspired an urban legend down in New Orleans about a man named Jacques Saint Germain, a wealthy, charming socialite who also happened to be a vampire. So, okay, after all of that, the history, the forgeries, the spiritual movements, the vampires, we're basically left with two ways of looking at the guy. Option A, was he one of the most brilliant, successful, and charming con artists who ever lived? Or option B, was there something genuinely extraordinary about him, something that all the easy explanations just can't quite cover? Look, the argument for him being a brilliant fraud is strong, super strong. He had no verifiable identity. The story that made him immortal was a proven fake, and a pro like Casanova called him out immediately. But the case for him being a genuine mystery is also really compelling. Why would incredibly smart and powerful men, like a king of France, trust him with state secrets and huge sums of money? He clearly had real demonstrable skills as a chemist. The simple answer, that he was just a con man, it just doesn't quite fit all the pieces of the puzzle. Ultimately, the story of the Comte de Saint-Germain might tell us more about ourselves than it ever will about him. The real question isn't just, who was he? It's, why do we want figures like him to exist so badly? Maybe it's because these people who seem to just break all the rules of history, identity, and even death, they remind us that the world is a much stranger and more mysterious place than we think.